The night has come, it's cold and losing my control. Your light is gone, and lonely darkness fill my soul. I wish that you could save me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Light Gate. We are broadcasting to you live from the city of New Orleans in the beautiful state of Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We are on Facebook, we're on Roku, we're on Rumble, and we are on YouTube. I want to take a quick second to thank our sponsor for our beautiful network from Carnation. We love you very, very much. I personally do drink this in my coffee every single day. I love it. I love everything they make. Y'all should try it out. Okay, so we have a really, really cool guest who's been here with us before, and I'm excited because we get to go meet him in person in October. So Preston, I send it to you.
Thank you, Dolly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for episode 124 of The Light Gate. Truly appreciate you guys showing up every Monday. We absolutely have a great time, so thank you. I, of course, am your host, Preston Dennett, and my lovely co-host is Dolly Safran. Super excited about our guest tonight. I'll get to him in just a sec. I do want to announce I just started a new Facebook group called The Healing Power of UFOs, trying to counteract the fear-based narrative that our governments are putting out there, which I don't think is justified or true or warranted, really. So check it out, The Healing Power of UFOs. It's growing fast, just brand new. So that is a little bit of interesting news. And let's just see who we got here in chat. And I'll be quick, guys, I promise, because I do want to get to our guest as soon as possible. But I love to say hi to you folks, because it's because of you we do this show. So, okay, we got Teresa Levine. Hello, we've got Kaleidoscope Eyes.
Kaleidoscope.
Michael Kennedy bringing the popcorn. Always a joy to catch the light gate. Thank you, Michael. We got Cherise. We got Candy the Brave. And Tim Houston all the way from Oz, down under.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
John P. Adventures and the Owlman. And Louise, we can always count on you. Thanks for joining us. We have Olivia and Peak. Oh, thank you, Peak. Another one of our true regulars. We adore you. Owlman, I love to see these familiar faces. Happy Lightgate Monday. We got Robin and Namaste of endless kindness and generosity.
Namaste.
We love you deeply. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. We have Tinfoil Hatter. No, you made it. We're doing good. You're not late. Oh, wow. All the way from Tasmania. That's very cool. Okay, we got My Bud. We have Robin and Candy the Brave and Bob Thorson, also very generous. Thank you, Bob. We truly appreciate it. Hope you're doing really well. And who else do we have here? Energy Shifter and Bambi Dudley and Max Meeks. We got Carl Mids and Summer Girl. And Eric Peterson representing Cincinnati, Ohio. Hello, Eric. Petersman. South Carolina. Wouldn't miss it for anything. Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Wendy Parks staying up late in the UK. Thank
my
you.
goodness. Thank
Appreciate
you.
It. We have Feeding Five from Indiana. We're going all across the United States and the world. Very cool. We have Lady Spider Witch. Ooh.
Lady Spider Witch. Yep.
We have Oil Painter and Lengthen Super Sour. And Patsy Foister.
Hi, Patsy.
Thank you, guys. Amazing that you could all join us tonight. So that is awesome. We truly appreciate it. But I'm going to get to our guest. Just pop up the banner. And if you guys have questions, please get them in nice and early. Kurt. Very cool. Okay, yeah, our guest tonight is the amazing Chris Stiles. He is, of course, an amazing researcher and an author of at least 2 books, and I hope more. He is a returning guest, so we're very, very excited. And if you haven't had a chance to check out his shows, please do. But let me tell you a little bit about him. He is an active UFO researcher who investigates classic and select current UFO incidents that have occurred in Atlantic Canada. He holds to a, quote, blended view of the UFO phenomena that allows for both the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and a significant psychological component, which is important because there is all kinds of stuff going on here. He is best known, of course, for his work on the 1967 Shag Harbour UFO incident and has presented at several MUFON symposia in both Canada and the US. He served as a paid technical advisor with several Canadian UFO feature documentaries such as Ocean's Entertainment, the Shag Harbour Incident, and Northern Lights. He has appeared in several US UFO specials such as Canada's Roswell and UFOs 2, Have We Been Visited? And in 2019 appeared in an episode of Ocean Mysteries with, get this, Celine and Fabien Cousteau, clearly descendants of Jacques Cousteau. He has also been on pretty much all the major UFO podcasts, of course, Coast to Coast, and many others. He's the author of 2 books on the Shag Incident, Dark Object with Don and Impact to Contact, which is probably the one you really want to check out, which is with Graham Sims. And his most recent book is so amazing, Sweep Clear 5, NATO's UFO Encounter. Oh, there's Duchess right behind you.
Oh, boy. Thank you for warning me. Well, no.
MUFON Canada presented Chris with an honorary membership in recognition of his lifetime achievement in ufology. How wonderful is that? And of course, he is organizing the upcoming Shag Harbour UFO Conference, which is in the first week of October 25. Here it is. Dolly and I are both presenting. We're super excited about it, and we'll be talking a little bit about that tonight, as well as many other topics. So let me just bring Chris on. Let me pull that off and pull Chris in.
Welcome, Chris.
Yes, thanks for having me again. I'm so
pleasure. Yeah.
Charged up, looking forward to it. Yeah. Love your show. I love the format. I love the fact that you guys really appreciate your fans as much as you do, and that you let them know. I mean, others do that, but not enough, and not as well as you do. I love your way of doing things. It's good, because anyway, yeah, no, I'm here to have talk about whatever you would like, or whatever your fans like, or hopefully there's a few tough questions. I don't get many of them, but I feel comfortable with that because I'm one of these guys. I'm never afraid to say I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I wish more people were like that because I always say, I'm not an expert in that, but I follow all of ufology as closely as I can. But there's so much going on right now. I mean, we have
it's overwhelming. It really is sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't possibly read all the books. There's, probably 100 published each year. There's a major congressional hearing tomorrow, I guess. So that should be interesting. We'll see if it's more of the dog and pony show, which I kind of expect it will be. But I'll keep an open mind.
Well, it's not the first time there was one in history. We've been down this road before. It has a modern twist to it, but there is a recurrent theme here. I'm afraid I have to agree with you. And it's disappointing and unfortunate. But I mean, I went through this years ago as a young fellow, so excited about the Condon report, and then we know how that went out, and every other attempt like that. So, but anyway, you keep open.
Yeah, right. We'll see.
I was really surprised. I was really surprised to find out that there was an actual congressional hearing in the 60s. And it wasn't like live broadcast on TV, and there certainly weren't podcasts then where people could watch it live, but one actually happened, and I finally got to see film of it. And it shocked me because it was held pretty much the way they're holding them now, just a whole different set of people in them. And they pretty much all were saying almost exactly the same thing with a little bit of
Sure.
twist nowadays. And it hasn't evolved really, not much. And I'm kind of hoping to see it evolve. I want to see more people coming to the fore, not the usual players, you know? I want to see people with real honest to goodness things to say about it, and Congress sit there and listen, you know, and actually put it into the record for real, you know?
Yeah.
It's that's one of the things I hope for. I might not get my wish, but I hope. Yeah.
You know, ironically, from the Canadian perspective, one of the things I realize is the current situation in the world of ufology is that the way that our governments are involved, yours and mine now, is the exact reverse of how it was in the 60s. You know, in the 60s, when the Condon Committee ended, you know, the decision was that there was nothing worthy of scientific study for the Air Force and to discontinue. Canada got extremely serious back then and made a very serious effort, had budgets, did actual investigations. And in today's age, you know, there's, like you say, we'll have to see. We could end up disappointed, but they're making all the noises like they're very interested, you know, south of the border and up here officially. Even though, like last week, I get questions about cases about Shag, Harbour, about cases by the head of operational space awareness at the Department of National Defense to me. You know, it. They also mentioned, officially we're out of the UFO business, and that's not why we're asking. So it's strange, our roles have reversed, the attitude of
Yep.
between then and now. But you know something, when I hear so much now, the theme down south seems to be of whistleblowers and the people coming forward. But there was an earlier age of whistleblowers that's forgotten in the US back in the very early 60s before Condon and that too. Because one of the gentlemen purported to be part of MJ12, Roscoe Hillencoder, the admiral, right? Did interviews with the New York newspapers, right? And he claimed that, that there was something real to it. And it was being held by the Air Force and, was very much a proponent for UFO reality, and that kind of period and how it eventually fizzled out is often forgotten,
Yeah, what I'd really like to see is have Congress bring up a panel of well-vetted UFO contactees, like Whitley Strieber, Travis Walton, Chris Bledsoe, Dolly Safran, and just some people who have real contact and something to say about it, and get that, because that's, to me, the absolute heart of the phenomena. It's not sightings, and I think the whistleblower is definitely a real cutting edge with lots of potential to change the way we look at things. But let's face it, people are having contact or have had contact, and that deserves to be heard. All right, so Chris, for those who are absolutely new to you, can you want to just give a little rundown of how you got involved in the whole UFO business?
Yeah, there used to be a show on. I used to really enjoy watching called Unsolved Mysteries, the original version of it there. And I was watching a broadcast of that. I think it was actually a repeat at the time, and it was the first I'd heard of the Roswell incident. And this would have been back in April of 1992. And I watched it with a close friend, and afterwards she asked me, is such a thing possible? And I said, I know it is, because we had this happen here in Nova Scotia. And of course, she'd never heard about it. And she dared me to call Stanton Friedman. And she said, he lives in Fredericton, which her parents lived in. And she handed me the old landline and double dog dared me to make the call. And I said I would. And she goes, I know you. You're never going to do it. Do it now. It was like that. And I literally thought, okay, got to save face here, got to make the call. And in those days, I didn't have a calling plan. I don't think there was any in Canada. I called the long distance operator, old school, and asked if there was a number listing for Stanton in Fredericton. To my surprise, there was a listed number. I called it, and it was immediately intercepted by a human answering service. And they said he was out of town, but if it was an emergency, like they had a contact number. And I said, yeah, okay, because somebody was poking me in the chest. They make the call, So they gave me the number. I called. Stanton was in Austin, Texas. I didn't ask where he was, or when they gave me the number, or checked the area code. And I called, and he picked up the phone, and I started telling him my vague recollections at the time. I was 12 during the Shag Harbour incident, and I was 175 miles away from it, but I did see a UFO the same night as many people did over Nova Scotia. There were many reported sightings, and the one I'd seen had reached the newspaper here in the city. My grandfather was on vacation, my maternal grandfather, down in Shag Harbour. He was one of the many non-reporting witnesses at the time, and I didn't remember the date. I knew it was 60s, and Stanton, even though he was about to leave for a conference, in Austin, he took about 20 minutes out of his time to listen to me, and he gave me some very basic practical advice. And I remember the first thing he said is, well, he said, you sound like the sort of guy that might pursue this. He said, if you decide to do that, you're going to have an easier time than I did. And I said, well, how do you know that? What's that based on? He said, fishermen never move. Just real. And he gave me a number of tips, and that was how it began.
Wow.
And then he said, I'm going to pass your name on to the Fund for UFO Research. And they sent me an application, and I sent it in, and they funded me to go to Ottawa and go through National Archives for 2 weeks. And I did. And one thing led to another, and the rest is history, But the thing is, what I called Stanton? He had not heard of the case, never heard of it. And, he was a UFO crash scenario specialist, right? And, but, who did? He called several researchers and close friends. And the first guy he called that remembered it well was, get this, first was Richard Hall, the late Richard Hall. And the next one was Phil Klass. And they both remembered it. And surprisingly, Klass said, there was something to that, and something really strange did happen there.
How long did it take him to show up to where you're at? In other words, did he come and see you?
Who? Stanton?
Yeah.
I went to see him. We corresponded by phone mostly for some time. A couple months later, we met and exchanged boxes of documents. I already put in requests and was getting huge amounts of stuff. We met. He came down just 60 miles from me. I was doing a talk in Shore at the
Oh, you're garbling up just a bit there.
College there. And I went down there to meet him.
Uh-oh, we're losing the internet.
Are we back? Or we're frozen?
Yeah, we have Corona Hall stream hitting us right now. It's not okay. Yeah.
We got a little...
Your image is frozen, but I can hear you. Can you hear us? Uh-oh, I think.
Wait, hold on.
Can you hear us, Chris?
Hear me now, as they say.
Yeah, hear you now. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Yes.
Are we going to try? Or if I lose it,
keep
I'll
going.
try to pop back in.
Energy
Again,
coming
okay?
in from the sun. It's impacting us right now. We have a big, bunch of Corona Hall stream coming in.
Oh, you did good.
Yeah. And the small CME may be starting right now, coming in as well. So yeah, it's probably not due. The CME till tomorrow, but that doesn't mean anything. Okay. Yeah.
So the Shag Harbour incident has to be one of the biggest UFO incidents, really, in U.S. history or world history.
Well, because unlike other crash scenarios, there's a lot of official documentation that was always unrestricted, and no one had just ever gone looking for it really and gathered it in one place. But I also decided I was going to meet all the people involved, the RCMP officers, Royal Canadian Mounted Police that responded, the original eyewitnesses that called in, the people that were running the air desk. That was Canada's equivalent of Blue Book at the time. And it was amazing. They were all quite open. They met me. The air desk staff were very interesting to meet. The fellow who investigated the Shag Harbour incident was Squadron Leader William Bain. A very seasoned pilot in the Air Force that was given a desk job after he had a serious crash and survived with what they used to call the Widowmaker, the old F-104s in Germany. And, he was just amazing. And he said to this day, they were quite convinced it was the real deal. You know what I mean? They did an investigation. To put it in perspective, in 1967, the Air Desk received 256 reports from police or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They would sift through that, and they did 9 on-site investigations in the cases that seemed most worthy, where they spent money, sent hardware, men. Like I say, it wasn't just a filing system like Blue Book had descended into, Unfortunately, a few years later, the decision was made to take investigation of UFOs and UFO incidents, right, away from the military and give them to Canada's National Research Council. Initially, it worked well. There was a couple of dedicated people, but as they retired, nobody took it up seriously to replace those people in positions of power. And by 1999, it had withered to nothing, and it was just allowed to fade away. Had become a political hot potato by then in this country.
Makes me think of RO here. Everybody thought it would be a great thing, and it's turning into be a bubble that popped. It's not right,
because back then you look at the military cases and the investigations they did here, they were very serious. And when you look at cases like Shag Harbour or the Stefan Mahala case, Falcon Lake, Manitoba, that landing case, they disagreed with the Condon Committee and met with some of the researchers here. Like, they thought that was quite genuine, when they looked at you look at the analysis that they did and the effort they brought to bear, they were very serious, and sometimes they would even pitch suggestions to the government of saying, like, for example, in Nova Scotia, we should keep 3 helicopters spread throughout the province. And unless they're needed for search and rescue or a critical case, they're on standby all the time for UFO cases. They were quite serious and did a very good job. And I think not enough attention has been brought to that sort of positive history. The Air Force here took the charge of investigating UFOs quite seriously. There was quite an effort by the Navy in this country, but they enjoyed the situation that they were not charged to have to interface with the public. The Air Force, because people thought flying air objects, they were kind of linked. So the Navy kind of walked their own line and did whatever they wanted, but they certainly investigated the phenomena here. And in fact, the Navy did defense research on such things. They actually began to do this during World War II, 1942, and continues to this day. And they have a special facility that that acts autonomously and only responds to the government in terms of finance matters and funding. The government actually has no direct control over it. And even the managers in the facility here, it's now called the Atlantic Center of Research and Development Canada. The research projects are decided by the bench scientists. Very unusual setup. And there's a long history. I'm not going to take up too much time with it, but the government kind of had to agree, since they were the first and were actually, had their own defense initiative here, to bring them into the fold. They had to kind of give them carte blanche, which was, to be autonomous. But accessing that stuff is quite something. It's pretty much impossible. They're not charged with having to interface with the public. The Air Force thing's gone away. And now it leaves us at odds, the complete reverse of what happened in the 60s and, when we were very active and very serious and the U.S. was dismissing it, now we're in the reverse situation here.
The pendulum swings, I guess.
And yet the head of Operational Space Awareness, sends me inquiries about cases. So, but they're not in the business, he says. So make of that as you will.
Yeah, well, I feel like we should have a government body that does interface with the public, and there is truth and transparency with this subject. Because if we actually put time, money, and attention to this, it would absolutely change the way people think about this. Well, it shouldn't be considered a fringe topic. It really shouldn't.
No, not at all. And the thing is, often, these things veiled under the guise of national security. I don't think that has a lot to do with it. You know what I think it is? I think it's the reverse of that. I think it's national insecurity. These guys have massive budgets and massive black budgets, right? And the truth is they don't really know what's going on for the most part.
Well, so one thing I'm interested in is, bringing it to the Shag Harbour conference. How long has this been going on, and what inspired you to start doing this conference?
Well, in its current format of being in the town of Yarmouth and being at the Rod Grand and bringing in U.S. and other international researchers, right? I mean, we've had people from, all over, in past years. This is the fourth year for it being in this format. Before this, events were simply held in fire halls and church halls in the fishing village, right? It was always the hope of the community and the people of the surrounding communities in Shelburne County to grow this. But as I told them, and they eventually listened, it was unfortunately there's not the facilities there to have it. That's a very rural area, and there just is nowhere you can have an actual convention or bring in people. Very little hotel space, right? However, Yarmouth is certainly within striking distance, and by going there, you're in a place where the ferry comes over from Maine. You can still do a tour from there to the area, yet people can be comfortable, and it's worked out well. The other thing is the community of Yarmouth, the county and surrounding other rural areas have supported it greatly. We get financial support and many other kinds of support from the communities. They've embraced it, which is great, and it's been to our benefit. And we had a hard time getting this thing started because when the decision was first made that we're going to crank this up a notch and go to the big town of Yarmouth, which is anything but, Betty Hill used to like going there. She was always asking me about people still there, when Betty was still alive, and I'd be speaking with her somewhere. It was funny, I guess she loved Nova Scotia, and she'd ask about the little places, always like, is so-and-so still alive in Yarmouth? Is this fella still alive in Tatamagouche, in these little tiny fishing ports and villages, But boy, yeah, she was a card too, that's for sure. But so yeah, we had a hard time because when we were trying to give birth to this thing and crank it up a notch, next thing you know, we were into COVID, right? And all that, the restrictions of bringing people across the border made it impossible. And 3 times, it took 3 times before we had the first one, there was a chance of it pulling off. And then we had to dodge a few hurricanes. A lot of people, I know that they're not great on geography south of the border. When I say Nova Scotia, they're like, isn't that halfway to Greenland? And well, depending on where you live, it might be halfway, yeah.
I know.
In the US, continental US. But the thing is, we do get hurricanes. We don't get them often. When we get them, we usually get a good kicking out of them. I'll tell you, we've had some. We've had loss of life here in the city of Halifax, even from hurricanes, and really have setback. But we only get a bad one about once every 10 years here. It's not Florida, But then again, I often call Nova Scotia the tailpipe of North America. It hangs out in there into the Atlantic, has its own little sort of subclimate, kind of like Cape Cod, you know what I mean? But we do get hurricanes.
Yeah, I know. It's not because, man, it's going to be October. That's the one thing that I was thinking, please don't let there be a hurricane when we go. I've been sending messages out to the universe. just let it be. Leave it alone. No,
Yeah,
no,
we
no.
don't want one. Yeah, you know, we had a conference in Dartmouth years ago, long before this thing here, and it was part of a documentary that was done back at the time, and I'll never forget it. And we had a bad one to hit Hurricane Juan, and it did a lot of damage in the city. And the facility we had was right on the waterfront. The tides were so high they came up over that part of the waterfront and the street. And
Yeah.
I mean, when I went down, the next day I saw them shoveling starfish and all kinds of stuff off the building steps and
Oh
around
my
the edge.
gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was that bad. I remember that. Yeah, but it just goes to show you. Yeah, we were without power about 2 weeks, and it looked like, you know, Katrina. You know, we were hit. It was only like a category 2, but but it was like the perfect storm, and it hit at high tide coming in from the right side of the city. You know what I mean?
Boy.
Everything was against it. We got really kicked out of
Yeah.
that one, but we managed to pull off that conference. Now that had nothing to do with the Yarmouth event we're having, but we've dodged all the ones down there, so we don't get many. But I have to say, it tends to be that time of year we get them, September, October, when we do. But 1 in 10 years, and it just takes a little bit of luck. And we've been getting it so far. In fact, we've had very good weather, and people often remark they're surprised how good the weather can be. But then again, that can change in Nova Scotia. We have a couple sayings here, and one of them is, "What follows 2 days of rain? Monday."
Yeah.
You know, and of course, if you don't like the wind, the other older one is, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes, right? Because we're almost an island. It's we hang out there in the Atlantic, it's a peninsula, and, the weather can be something, and yet we've gone through just now a period of drought and had trouble with forest fires, and,
Oh boy.
and
Yeah.
that's pretty unusual here, but
Yeah.
anything's possible. Um, but Halifax is the northernmost ice-free port, and this is like south of that, so it's unlikely. Although once in the last 200 years, we did get pack ice one year in 1970. Never happened again. It was more to do with wind than anything had brought it down from Iceberg Alley. A
Mhm.
very unusual precondition. But I'm so looking forward to meeting you two guys there and being able to look. We're going to pick you up at the airport and go down like probably the Fundy side of the province and maybe come up the Atlantic. Hopefully, I can arrange that.
Oh boy. That's
But
exciting.
you got to come on the tour. When they do the
We
Sunday.
are. We're staying
Yeah.
for the tour. We're staying for the tour.
Oh,
And
yes,
that's the great thing about this too, because we know exactly where everything happened. There's no doubt about these cases, and we can take you back there. The Coast Guard will show up and fire some flares out where it happened, and that
Oh, okay.
yeah, we get that kind of
Okay.
thing
I'll bring
kicking
extra
in.
batteries with me
I
then.
should picture
Yeah.
it. But there's no doubt as to the location. And the very last thing we're going to do, which ties in with my latest book, the Shelburne cases, will be at the gates of the base, which was Canada's most secret base at the time. The first 7 years of operation, it was a U.S. base on Canadian soil. It was the command control center, the central hub for the world SOSA system that the U.S. had built, right?
Yep.
Sonar and magnetic anomaly detection to track Soviet subs, right? It operated under a cover story, and it has quite the history. We'll go right to the base. The buildings are all still standing. They're derelict, and usually we just go in the entrance a bit, and I stand there and I can point out where that NATO mission occurred, and I
Okay.
can name every ship that's there, U.S. and whatever, and
Exciting.
I'll be talking about that at the conference and showing excerpts from the actual ship's logs. And, this is not as told by Commander X. It's a matter of history. And it's like the Shag Harbour incident. I mean, it's a compelling argument for UFO reality. I mean, you got to admit it's unusual when somebody before he passed, like Phil Class, come up to me, wanted his picture taken with me, hit me on the back, and said, "Wow, excellent work you've done." He said, yeah." And then he said, as they were taking the picture, he says, "I'll probably go on my website and try explain this." He goes, "Don't let that bother you." He was very gracious, and I had to laugh. To be honest, when I first met him, I remember how I thought of him as a boy when you see a picture of him in the old books like the Hynek Report or the UFO Experience. This back then, this thin man with the skinny black tie and all these awful attitudes, you know. But when I met him, I had to almost feel sorry for him, but he was very gracious and very complimentary and said,
Yeah.
That's nice.
you know, as to my technique. And he said, no, something did happen there and you've done an amazing job, you know. And yeah. And when they sit there, but, you know, like I say, I don't get that many tough questions. Most of them were not to try to attack. Well, in fact, Stanton gave me the name. I should have wore the T-shirt. I'll have to do that sometime. The group made me a T-shirt. Stanton gave me the name, the Bulldog. They use it, in the, you know, and the group down there made me a T-shirt one year. It's quite something. It shows a bulldog crunching down a flying saucer. You know what I mean?
Gosh,
it's got my name, Chris the Bulldog Styles, on it. You know, but. Stanton said that at the start of one of the Canadian dog, and it just stuck, you know.
Well, all right. So it's October 3rd to 5th.
Yeah.
What I thought might be interesting to do is just take a look at some of the speakers that we have. So here's Mark D'Antonio, who we had on the show, by the way.
Yeah.
Boy, he's going to be amazing if
he's involved with a lot of things. And of course, everybody sees him on we see him up here in shows like The Proof is out there, and you know, many others, right? You know, and of course we know his interest in astronomy and video analysis. And I'm looking forward. Him and I have never met yet. It'll be the first time. In fact, and I've got a great little couple of shots I want to give him and get his analysis on that somebody brought forward recently. And I could have sent them elsewhere, but I was holding on to them for him.
That's fantastic.
Oh, yeah, he was on our show. He's a riot, and boy, is he intelligent. Dolly and him were really going at it. It was amazing.
I love the fact that he's online almost every night showing the skies. You know, he has 2 different telescopes that he can triangulate, and it's incredible the amount of information, and he has a free ability for you to take pictures of the sky, and you can send him a message and say, can you focus on this?
I'll have to check it out. You know, I rarely find enough time for this. I'm so busy out on the road and doing other things, but I've heard about that. He has quite a following up here, you know, and one of the reasons why we invited him up. Yeah.
I know.
Well, I'm excited to hear him speak firsthand because he has so much information.
It's like getting people together. You know, this is what I love about these things, because otherwise, you know, you miss this. And to me, that's the real gift. You know, like that's what makes the hair stand up in your neck when you meet the personalities, when you meet the real witnesses, when you hear the stories, when you feel it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's one thing to see on the screen, and this is great. But I'm looking so forward to meeting all of them. Guys.
It's definitely different.
It's what it's all about. You know, you got to be there.
Right. Darcy Weir, see, there it is. He just put out a new movie. I guess you would call it a movie, and it's Psychic, the New Phenomenon, or Psychic Ability, the Phenomenon. And it's interesting. I watched the pre-show of it, and we're going to watch it tomorrow. I want to see it, and because I've never really seen anything he's done before, so I'm going to pay attention to this.
Yeah, and he's going to have something new for us we haven't seen here. And we've had him up before, and they wanted him back, and we're doing it, and we're going to open this year with him. And I'll tell you why. That was a very much a conscious decision on my part, and I brought it to the group. You know, there's a lot of people involved. When he said that I organize, I'm just one small part of it. I help sort of interface with the talent, is the way I put it. But these people like Darcy, he was there last year, and he, you know, everybody enjoyed it. The trouble was at the end of the Saturday program where we have him, you sit on those hard chairs all day, and then you tried to watch a 2-hour movie or something, you know. And I thought it was unfair to him and the people. As much as they liked it, it was an ordeal. And I said, you know, you got to open and let them do that at the start. And
I agree with that. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, we try to think of the speakers and what best, you know, presents them in the best light and allows them to be more, you know, most enjoyed, you know. By the
well, I like that, you know, when you go to that conference, you have the chance to see all the speakers. Because I went to Contact in the Desert, and it was just
Oh yeah,
amazing.
this is small time. It's up close and personal. It's professionally done. We have a like dedicated audio visual guy and computer guy who's a real whiz there. You know, where I kept telling them, you know, you have to do this. You have to make a certain standard here, but at the same time, it is up close and personal, and everybody makes time for everybody, and they've loved it. And you know, all those that have participated, we've had people come back a second time. God, we had Nick Pope twice. We had, and you know, we got a one great tradition here too. We've had a number of cases, and unfortunately it's happened with us. We had Kevin Randall booked earlier, and you know, his health issue came up, and but if God willing, we can have him back next year. We will. But we've had several speakers where we've held a spot a year or two, and they said, "Well, look, I'd like to come," and we do that, and we'll get them back. You know what I
You
mean?
did that for us last year. We weren't able to make it. We were going to come, and
Oh,
then
that's right. No, no, no. We strive to do that, honestly. Like, you know,
yeah,
yeah.
It's awesome.
yeah.
All right, so Mark Antonio is going to talk about how UFOs get from here to there. That should be interesting. And let's see, Darcy Weir, Puerto Rico UAPs. All right. Puerto Rico has an enormous amount of activity.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's this guy.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
I'm excited. I'm going to be presenting on some of the more extensive cases of UFO contact.
You know, when I read your book on schoolyard encounters, right then, long before we got to this format or how I thought, man, as soon as we can, we got to get him there. That book jazzed me up. I remember when you were on that little show I had till they couldn't bend my arm and make me do it anymore. I had going up here, right? It just wasn't my thing. I'm so busy out there in the field and knocking on doors and crawling around and losing sleep, etc. But when I read that book, I thought that was it. I remember when you were on the show, like we were kind of a kindred spirit in that I had 8 years experience in special ed. You know what I mean? And
Oh, wow.
you know, that you had bothered to look at this from a child's perspective. I found it very fascinating. And yeah, I knew right then, I thought, well, you got to meet this guy, got to get him up here somehow, got to tell this group, you got to have him.
It's funny because I rarely do conferences these days, ever since 2020 or so. I used to do them once or twice a year. Now it's once a year if.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I must admit, you know, and some people, you know, like I know people like Kevin Randall do very few, but when I call him, he says, because it's you calling it, we'll come, you know, like, and, you know, I hear that a number of times and I, you know, sure, they're being kind, but sometimes I do realize when they come and you meet them, you realize it was quite genuine. You know what I mean? They realize things are a bit different here and the effort and the understanding and you know it's just different, that's all. You know, different's always good to me, you know.
All right, and then we have this speaker who I've heard before.
Yes.
Well, you want to give a little bit of a preview about what you're going to talk about?
Basically how this all came about for me, and going to go through some of my experiences and stuff like that and things that I've learned and what I know. And I do have one thing that I'm adding into it at the end of my presentation, and that is ET has given me a message to give to y'all. And so I'm going to tell you now that's coming. And
that's the scoop. This has not been heard before too. So
no, they have a last message. And so it's coming through me. I've spent 2 weeks now being educated about what it's going to be, and I have to take dictation at this point. He's going to make me sit down one night coming up like in the next 2 days and write it down and let me polish it off so that I can read it to you, because I don't dare speak for them without having something to look at, because it's impossible. I want to be exact and they want me to be exact. That was the same one with the thing that we put in the front of Symmetry. He did that dictation with me as well. So yeah, that's coming. And it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about that because I haven't even heard this yet. So
yeah.
Just one more reason to come, Dennis.
All right. And here's another speaker that's coming who we've actually also had on the show
yes.
about, gosh, over a year ago, almost 2.
Yeah. Now, I met Terry once before back. I was talking, and, like I say, I don't travel much anymore. I certainly don't leave the country anymore. And we met in, I think it was 1997. I was speaking at the Pacific Space Center in Vancouver, and we met, and I can remember. And I remember afterwards, everybody was trying to get a chance to pick my brains a little more, and they were fighting over who was going to take me to supper. And you had the CSETI people, and you had MUFON, and there was UFO BC and other groups. And we ended up in this kind of crazy car chase through Chinatown, I remember. And I forget what group I ended up with, but I don't think it was Terry. So we've been talking quite a bit, him and I thought, yeah, well, it's time to finally have that conversation and give you the chance, right? But he's coming to bring in his wife, and looking forward to meeting everybody. Him too, of course.
Yeah, me too. Because he is a contact. He's a twin as well, which I find interesting.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know. You see that? Yeah.
Yeah, he's absolutely had contact, and he's very knowledgeable on this subject. He's been on it for a long time. So that should be really interesting.
Well, I remember him being there, but that was back in '97. Yes,
Wow.
All right, and then we have, I don't recognize this guy. Who is he?
Okay. Yay.
He's kind of a obsessive lone wolf, I hear, is how people describe, and
here is a nice guy.
Yeah, shows up unprepared, just wings it, but everybody goes, what? Damn, hell, like, where'd he come from,
Yep.
I'm excited to hear, because this is an ongoing investigation. As I know from writing books and doing investigations, it never ends. It's always an open investigation.
No, and I never go down there without something new. It may not be big. In some years it is big. Like when I finally made the Shelburne breakthrough, that was big. And oh boy, the next thing you know, they had me on all the big shows for a while. And I couldn't believe it when I went on. It didn't stay there that long, but for a few days, a book specialized at Shelburne was like #1 and #2 for a few weeks there of the UFO books when they were waiting for Imminent to come out there. So I was shocked at that because none of the others had done that well on Amazon in the past. So, but, if it isn't that, sometimes those little things, last year I named a member of parliament where his staff back in 1994, and I said the amount and what member of parliament was, and had tried to get me to stop and offered me $50,000 to stop back in 1994. Yeah, and people were shocked because and I'm saying and somebody come up to me and go, aren't you afraid about being sued? I said, well, it ain't happened yet. We'll see if it happens. I'll let you know by next year. And of course, nothing's happened. Then again, lawsuits in Canada is kind of a joke. You don't. You don't get it.
It's not that different here.
The lawyer, you'll probably end up with a lawyer's bill afterwards because he didn't get enough out of it. That's kind of the way tort law works up here.
I wrote an article once for UFO Universe magazine about the alien clown connection because some people as little kids see ETs come in and have screen memories, I guess, as clowns. A clown tried to sue me. Not kidding. The editor of the magazine called me up. He's like, well, we're being sued. You're kidding. Yeah, defamed clowns.
The last time there's been very few that somebody said they were going to sue me. First of all, apparently I'm like, yeah. He tells me, and he says, so what do you say to that? And I said, well, you want to give me the name of your solicitor, your barrister, lawyer, whatever you call it. I said, and he can meet with my lawyer. I said, they're very nice people. I'm sure they'll get along and work this out like a good day, But yeah, we're not near as litigious as the U.S., but I mean, actually, it's starting to get that way here a little more. But in the end, it's still not worth it to sue someone in Canada, generally speaking, unless you're suing the government. But then you got to win. Then you got to win, and they make it difficult because up here, if need be, sometimes they'll change the legislation, or the act to prevent you from winning.
Yeah. Well, the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy here in the U.S. tried to sue the NSA, National Security Agency, which of course didn't go well. But it did go to court, and they did get some documents released, but they were completely blacked out. So they basically proved the cover-up.
Something. Okay, here's the surprise here, right here. I mean, I work, I wouldn't say not often, but several times closely with Stanton Friedman on a few things, right? And of course, how famous was he for holding up pages, documents, and a lot of black ink, right?
Right.
I have never had a document released to me with black ink on it, ever.
Wow.
Wow.
And I've had a lot of stuff released. I mean, to give you one significant example that, is connected sort of in a way to the cases I did, a lot of researchers and people up here for a long time, we used to keep hearing when we'd investigate cases that involved the Royal Canadian Mounted Police about something called the Space Object Contingency Plan. That was a sort of almost like a treaty or working agreement between the RCMP at the back in the day, the CIA, American government, whatever, like if we, like with NORAD, if we were moving into one another's area or they came up here and wanted to look at something, who was in charge, what the rules were, right? We kept hearing about this. But anyone who ever put in a request for this policy or to ask about it or to see copy of it, no, you weren't getting it. And they would always kind of play dumb. And generally up here, you can access a lot of these RCMP files on UFOs, and they had specific UFO forms, right? We're kind of lucky up here because with that police force, it operates locally, provincially, and nationally as a police force. And, they have very strict standards, unlike, where a county sheriff down in, one of the smaller counties in the US state might be able to say, no, no show here, go away, it's nothing, and there's no one to answer to. They can't do that up here. They investigate anything like that as a disinterested third party and write it up, and that's that. Well, anyway, every now and then, one of the older Mounties, you'd be talking to them that say, well, we got to check with the Space Object Contingency Plan on what to do. This American guys came up, or the CIA showed up and wanted us to take it there or whatever. And they say, no, we don't get training in this when you inquire, but we call the provincial headquarters and they check the book there on what the procedure is or who's allowed, right? Generally, any bona fide U.S. agency could ask for an RCMP escort and be allowed access. And however, if Canadian Armed Forces showed up on the scene, they're the lead agency always and take, but up to that point, the Americans or another nation even that was a signatory to this. But when we used to try to find this, you couldn't find a copy of it. Well, I eventually did get it released. There's a chapter about it in the Shag Harbour book I did with Graham Sims about it, right? Called The Master Plan. And we had a laugh because when I finally got it released and they sent it with no redactions in it, and it was an amazing thing because it would say like how far to keep the crowd back, if there was radiation, depending on the direction, what U.S. people could request from us and what they had to comply with and blah, blah. There was a lot of detail in it. Well, the thing was, I mean, it was a shocker. But when it got sent to me, and they sent me this huge hard copy of it, I remember, on legal size paper. And when I looked at the title, it had the Space Object Contingency Plan, AKA also known as, get this, the Master Plan. So we had to laugh. I thought, what a poor choice of titles. And the gentleman I was dealing with, who was the chief RCMP archivist, Sergeant Maurice Laferriere was his name. It's all written up in the book. He said, yes, I don't know who picks these names. Very poor choice of words. Try not to read too much into that. I said, and we were laughing. I said, I will try, but
what agency produced that document?
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
They did.
And what happened is they used to deny it. But here's what happened, Dolly. This is a great story. It's a chapter in the book, the impact to contact, right? And what happened is I was looking for some RCMP files. You see, there's a strict thing here. Like, say somebody has a UFO event, and and they investigate everything, even an abduction or something, right? Anyway, you get a local depot investigate a case, right? They write it up. It stays on file there for 1 year. After a year, it's sent to RCMP headquarters. It stays there 3 years in case it's reopened or some follow-up or cross-reference happens. After that, it's sent to National Archives, at which point, and this is my version of it, it disappears somewhere for 15 to 20 years in one of those warehouses, like at the end of
Indiana Jones, yeah.
yeah, Indiana Jones. And if you're lucky, it'll eventually resurface in a collection that you can package or borrow, right? So
Yeah.
we're always trying to get the reports before they get sent to, well, actually, it's called Library and Archives Canada now, one of our many rebrandings, you know. Well, I was trying to get these RG 18, Records Group 18 reports of the Mounties, and oh, Chris, you're too late. We're so sorry. We just cleaned all the files. We got nothing here. We just shipped them off to National Archives. Blah, blah.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And she goes, I could go back and look, Chris, but she goes, I did it myself. And this was, it's written up in the book. It was a Corporal Lise Lachance, you
Mm.
know. And the corporal says, you know, the only thing there was just some old policy document, and everybody up here had been looking for this thing for years. She said space object plan or something like that. I jumped up off the couch. I was like, that's it. That's what I want. And there's this silence, and
Wow.
she goes, no, that is not what you want. She says, I have your request in front of me. And I'm just making this up as I go, right? I'm winging it. I'm go, no, that is what I want. I just didn't know what it was called, right? I'm sorry, she said, I can't help you with this. You'll have to send in a second request and we'll look at it then. I said, well, listen, and this is the big battle. I go, could you go up and just, she goes, you had it in the room you said the other day you're next to in the, yeah. Could you get me the file number? So she gets me the phone number, and I could actually, you're on the phone, her voice call, and I could hear her high heels clicking up the hall. Comes back. Oh, it's, and she gives me this long military type file number, right? So I immediately send in an access to information request, something I rarely do. And well, we're getting to that, and here's why. So anyway, 2 days later, I get a phone call from the chief archivist, this Sergeant Maurice Laferriere, heavy French accent, career guy with the RCMP, and he calls me up and he goes, Mr. Stiles, this is Sergeant Maurice Laferriere. He says, I look at your request here, and that file number you said makes absolutely no sense at all. Oh, I said, I'm sure it's correct. I said, I was talking to Corporal Lachance. I was actually looking for some UFO reports, but I guess they've been transferred to National Archives. I said, I had to repeat the number to me twice. Well, he says, I can speak to her, but I don't know. He says, I've never seen a number like this. And I said, well, she'll know right where it is. She can show it to you. And he's starting to sound very disinterested. And you can hear his voice fading. And he's going to put down the phone. And I'm saying, well, I'm sure she'll know where it is. You be sure to ask her. I said, because she read from it to me. That wasn't true. That was the. Oh, she did she? And he goes up the hall, and I thought, oh God, what have I done? You know?
Yeah, you did.
No.
He calls me back 10 minutes later. He says, yes, I know what you're talking about now. You do? Okay.
Wow.
He said, I think I can help you. He said, but this is not going to happen under the Act. I'm listening, I said. Why is that? Because I would not have enough time. He says, under the Access to Information Act, I have to respond within 30 days. I can ask for a 15-day extension, and that's all I can do. And that's not going to be enough time. And I said, why is that? He said, because I'll need permission from Ottawa, from Washington, and every provincial capital before I can release this.
Yep.
And I said, well, I'll tell you what, Sergeant. I said, I'm a very patient guy. I'm in this for the long haul. I said, so if I can get monthly verbal updates from you on the phone, if you want to give me a call, as you've been just so kind to do, I see no reason to complain to the Information Commissioner of Canada. So do we have an understanding? Yeah, I think we do, he said. And true to his word, he called every month saying, I've got the letters back from Regina and from Halifax and Washington, and and eventually they released the whole thing to me with no redactions, no blacking. They paid for the cost of it and everything. Far better service than we get out of Library and Archives Canada, by the way. And that's how I got that released. You know what I mean? But
in my estimation, you've done the impossible. Because see, I'm telling you, working for the government as I have and the positions that I have, I can tell you absolutely at no time
Yeah.
and in no way would that ever have happened, ever.
Yeah,
So,
but you got to think like the government. Here's the thing. Here's what happens. Say
mhm,
didn't have the knowledge and the experience up to that point when I was trying to get this and was willing to stretch a little and stretch the rules a little there to get it. Um, if I had just asked and it was somebody up there, like unlike this sergeant, but say some new staffer, right? They would look at this and think, "Well, I can't do this within 30 days." So they just say, "No, we can't do that as a matter of procedure." They're not going to explain to you. If
right.
you ask me outside the act and give me leeway, we can negotiate something here.
Yeah.
And often I've looked for files and you start saying, well, what's the problem? And you start digging at them. And sometimes, not always, they'll fess up to it and you say, well, listen, and then you start to negotiate. And this is how I've got a lot of it. But it's only in the last years, and I mentioned to Stanton, and he was going, I said, look, you go through my file cabinet, all the old hard copy stuff before I did a lot of the electronic. No black ink anywhere on any of it. And I'm not sure. I'm not implying anything. I'm not really sure what that means myself. But maybe it's because they think this guy's such a shit disturber. That it's not worth it. We'll just give him. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But it must mean something, doesn't? Don't you think?
Well, does this all still have to be done through paperwork? Now that we are in the digital age, you'd think
Oh
that
no,
could.
no. I get digital. Like when I get for example, when I got the logbook for HMCS Cape Scott, on the Shelburne mission released to me, that's all done digitally, right?
Oh, wow.
But that had to happen outside the act because during COVID they were so short staffed, right? They wouldn't guarantee a time frame. You had to agree to have it being done outside that and the rules of that. It took 7 months to come instead of a month, right? But in the end, I got it, and I bothered them a couple times, and I actually got some. It was like dealing with your stern aunt. I remember this female staffer. I got a couple of those back. If you keep asking, it will take longer. Thank you. And I waited, and in the end, I did get it. You know what I mean? And there were all kinds of independent ways. I won't bore you with those deals of verifying it. I mean, I don't take anything without questioning it from the government. It's like there's one of the problems I have with the disclosure thing. Look, I'm not against disclosure at all, and I've become a little involved with the movement up here, which has taken a very different form. And I'm not at liberty to talk about because I'm not actually a member, and I don't want to. They got some important work coming up here. But let me tell you this: uh, the problem I've always had with the concept of disclosure is that for all these years, when the government was saying there's nothing to this, nothing worthy of study, nothing happening, if they suddenly said, "Hey, here's the answer, and here's what it's all about," I'm not sure I'd be any more inclined to believe them then. You
Feel
know
the
what I
same
mean?
way.
They still have this great credibility problem. It doesn't mean it's bogus totally, but I'd have to really vet it. I'd have to really, use due diligence, right? But that's just me. This is the doting Thomas and me. But that's okay. They're all doing their job, and you know, I do what I do. It's not quite a job. I do it because I'm just generally interested. And when I first started, like I say, Stanton hadn't heard of the case. I can remember trying to Google up, or back then you were still using things like the dog pile as a search engine. And, you'd put in Shag Harbour, a tiny fishing village on the southwestern of the faces the Gulf of Maine, blah, blah. It was forgotten, entirely forgotten, except to the eyewitnesses. And, within a couple of years, I was on national TV and getting funding from the fund. And I thought, my God, there is life after high school. But I was serious, I'm not making light of it. But a lot of the people I thought were serious, I discovered weren't serious enough. And, it's just been that's how it unfolded for me. But like, you know, it's amazing when you do find something like that. When the success stories, like how it worked and why it hasn't worked. And in this country, perhaps more than anybody, I've got the feeling of understanding. But you learn little things along the way. You learn how naive they are and how they lie to each other, the different agencies, and even within agencies. Like, and I sometimes use the expression some here. Well, I don't know that we ever recovered any aircrafts. I said, well, who was that? Oh, well, warrant officer, whatever. I'll tell you right now, he pulled the Phil Corso, I call it. Took it, threw it to the desk, and said, "That's mine." Like, and has yet to change his mind. Hopefully, will someday. Oh, how do you know that? You know what I mean? It's a mixed bag, but I mean, people are people, and you know these guys, they're just people doing the job, and you can give them a policy, and you can make them swear an oath, and you can make them to whatever you want, but in the end, they have the human weaknesses, right?
Yeah, that's what I was
You
going
know,
to say. They're all just people who want to do a good job.
well, they don't all want to do a good job.
Well,
Most of them do, and most value that. I'm not. I'm not one of these ones saying it's all crap. You know what I mean? It's a mixed bag. But what
there's good people in government, is what I'm trying to say. There's some are good people.
there are, yeah, sure there are well-intentioned people,
Yeah.
and they're often taken advantage of by the badly intentioned people within government, right? But
Mhm.
whether you're good intentioned or bad intentioned, there's just little awareness of what's going on around them and how complex the system is and how it works against you, even when you think it's working for you. For example, like I said, in the history of this country, when they took UFO investigations away from the Air Force here, it sounded like it was a good thing for what they deemed in the document that did that, signed by the defense minister at the time, for serious scientific study. Well, it started off that way, but then it became a political hot potato, and it just faded away into obscurity and oblivion eventually. It was meant to be a good thing, but sometimes good intentions go awry. I mean,
Right.
such is life.
There's quite a few people talking about Paul Hellyer in chat.
Oh, Paul Hilliard. Okay.
Would you say he's Canada's, highest profile whistleblower? Would you give him that kind of?
Well, he brought up a lot of attention. He had no interest in UFOs when he was the defense minister whatsoever. And I don't know if he did at the end, but I heard him speak, and he used to be very open and honest about that for a long time. He became very interested in the topic, all aspects of it, right? And but while he was serving as our defense minister, right, it was a unique time in Canadian history. And here's something many people have forgot, but it's verifiable. You can go online and look this up. We had two defense ministers at the same time. Canada still had a large military in peacetime in the 60s. We certainly don't now. For example, like we had a 60 ship Navy. We don't
Wow.
have anything like we need right now. But it was a time when the government was cutting back, and they were bringing about a very unpopular policy, popular within and without of the military, called unification, creating a single armed force.
Mm.
And Paul Hellyer was the fall guy for that. They'd given him that, and it ended up destroying his political career, right? I mean, he did a lot of good work. I could go on about the other things he did, but at the time he wasn't involved. All the UFO matters were handled by the other defense minister. You never hear his name. It was Leo Cadieux. And any document I've ever found signed, including on Shag Harbour, is signed by Leo Cadieux, not Paul Hellyer. Um, like I said, I met Paul Hellyer, when I got to chat with him. He had a very honest interest, and he attributed, of course, to first reading the book. You probably heard that. Was it the day after Roswell, right? And he certainly became and was a proponent for it, and, brought a lot of attention to it. But he was not involved, had no personal interest and no professional involvement with it in his role. He was so tied up with reorganizing the armed forces, right? I used to feel so sorry for him, because he became, for a period, identified with unification. When you came to a large military city like Halifax here in Nova Scotia, was a huge port then. He was he couldn't walk the street safely. He
Wow.
went down to the Dockyards Way and 9,000 people showed up to block his way. You know what I mean? It was very controversial, right? He was the face of that. His political career, he didn't get reelected, right? He left the Liberal Party, tried to join the New Democratic Party up here. They wouldn't have him. He created his own political party. I felt very sorry for him. He was used by the Liberal Party here, to bring about this unpopular policy, but unfortunately, but he did a lot to promote aspects of UFOs, like I say, in his post political, life, right? And but no, he had little involvement then, at the time. I mean, there were a couple things he did things, but they were more ceremonial. Like I can remember there was a Centennial Project, Canada's 100-year anniversary back in 1967, when when
Yeah.
they used to have these silly projects, like you paint a rock and you put the prime minister's face. It could be any stupid thing. I can remember they used to have ads to encourage this. I was 12 at the time. I can remember they showed a guy filling a swimming pool with maple syrup, and he's dressed in a tuxedo, and everything's just so when he dives into it.
Actually, remember that. I heard about
That
that.
sounds dangerous.
Yeah.
And at the end of the commercial, would say, "What are you going to do for a Centennial Project?" Right?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, somebody out in St. Paul, Alberta, they built a UFO landing pad, right? And for some reason, I wish I'd asked Paul Hellyer this, but I didn't get a chance. Didn't think of it. He did the ribbon cutting ceremony for this Centennial Project, right? But here's the thing: the other person on the podium with them that cut the ribbon was, get this, Mother Teresa. I'd love to know how that came about and why.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Holy cow. Wow.
yeah, a little odd, eh? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer. If somebody knows that out there, I'd love to hear it.
Are there any other high-profile Canadian whistleblowers within government that are bringing forth information because they seem to be coming out of the woodwork here? I don't know how many of them are sanctioned, how many are complete stooges, but
there was much made about the member Larry McGuire there. What was it, a year or two ago? And the attention he was bringing to it, lobbying the defense minister, saying Canada needs to be serious about UFOs, and it really brought it in the news here for a while. In the public saying, I don't believe he got reelected, or and at the time he was sitting in opposition with the Conservative Party. Politics is a strange affair up here, as it is in so many places. I mean, yeah, and I've never seen a period where U.S. politics influenced us so much. I mean, anybody up here that had placed a bet, or the odds were bizarre. If you looked at such things online, everybody was saying it's absolutely impossible. The Conservative Party here was the shoe-in, to win, until Justin Trudeau resigned and somebody new come in, and Trump had his say about it, and the rest is history, as they say, and everybody said, oh, no, the Liberal Party cannot possibly win a fourth term again, but they did. You know what I mean? Like, such is the weird world of Canadian politics, I had to laugh when I'd be down south and somebody say to me, you don't actually have a political party. They don't actually call themselves liberal. I go, oh, yeah, but a capital L. Yes. Yeah.
What's sad to me is that UFOs have been pulled into all of politics.
It's terrible. I have to say, though, there's a little hope. The one thing when I watched on television, when you have, the testimonials and that before Congress or some subcommittee or whatever in the U.S., right, that they appear to be kind of bipartisan. You know what I mean? People will show up and treat it seriously from both parties. I find that encouraging, just in the general mild sense, that because it shouldn't be political in that sense,
Right. Let me see. Joyce Aldrich, who's from Canada, is asking about the MP in Montana. McGuire?
Yeah, Larry McGuire. Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think he got reelected, and he was sitting in opposition at the time. He wrote that our defense minister at the time, Anita Anand, saying that we need to be doing things like the U.S. is doing before Congress, but we also need to just create a public agency that takes reports, and we need to get serious about the UFO topic, and it got attention here in the media and that, but eventually, there was a real news day when they didn't have a slow news day, and in time, that effort and the impetus of that faded. But yeah, there's nobody here that from the political end is really pushing it. But I can tell you there's something afoot amongst the Canadian disclosure movement. I think in the near future, over the next year or two, you're going to hear a lot more. And I don't think it's going to mirror what the U.S. is doing on it, but it's something that, I think we'll see where it goes, but the attempt is to do the things like Larry McGuire did, right, and to present a forum and a way to contact all of our MPs, right, and I know I'm quite willing to do that, as my local MP, and in the province here we enjoy a lot of support, from people. But, it's time that the topic, the phenomena, not from the sense of view of tourism or what they can get out of it, but it's time that, it defines so much about who we are as a species, as a culture, we need to look at that bigger picture. And, if you don't, you can dismiss the premise, but I think you still need to recognize the importance of how it reflects what we are, regardless of what the ultimate truth is or what you're willing to accept or not, And it's a hard thing to do, to change minds. I know this is somewhat different. I can remember, for example, back when his acceptance speech there, when, Obama won his first term. You know what perked up my ears? I'm like, oh God, U.S. politics. I'm going to myself, yeah, like what's going on? I thought, but it was kind of historic, him winning. And I thought, I'm watching it. I'm not really listening. But in his address, I can remember the one thing I thought, well, boy, you never heard that before, when he was talking about all the people that he welcomed and that considers and that should have a say or concern of the government, was when he mentioned atheists. And I thought, boy, he's got to be the first to say that, you know what I mean? But he was trying to convey how inclusive he wanted things to be, right? But just when I heard the word, I thought, I can remember, kind of woke me out of going, oh God, yeah, get on with it. What's on after this? On TV, right? And I'm like, atheist, God. Now there's a change, a small change, but in terms of just acceptance, right? And I thought, odd,
Well, I wish we would get a sitting head of government to just say UFOs are real while they're in office. It's pretty simple.
Well, that's right, because even then you're not committing that it's extraterrestrial or extra dimensional or extra temporal or spiritual or any.
Say there's
just
something
to say
to it.
that there is something unknown. We don't have a good grip on it, or we know very little. And that's not going very far out in the limb. But they don't seem to want to do that, do they?
No, deniability, plausible deniability is their game. And they're not going to come out with a straight answer about it. And they have their reasons why. And it's not known to the public worldwide what that implies. And these are things that we all have to deal with, not them. I really don't see the government helping any of us as a people on this planet with this information. I really don't.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing. Like, you look in this country where you can say, well, who's handling UFOs now? And like I said, recently I had some questions come to me from the gentleman who currently is the head of, operationals, the situation in space, what's in orbit, the history, what's happening, anomalies, whatever. And yet they're not in the business or don't take reports and are clear to tell you this, well, then why are you calling this UFO guy to ask about this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's to keep people from losing their minds about it. That's why I think enough people now understand. There's been enough disclosure from ET side. In other words, we've seen enough anomalous stuff in the skies to know that it's not all the government. Okay, people know that something's going on worldwide, and the government has to respond to it some kind of way. Okay, and I think that they're using this forum to do that, but they're still running the narrative through it. In other words, they want you to believe what they want you to believe about it, not the other way around, what we in consensus are figuring out for ourselves.
But you know, Dolly, they're lucky. You know, they could sit there and deny this or say, make these policies. They get away with that. But you know what? Not everybody has that luxury. If you're an air traffic controller, if you're a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, right? And you have your procedures. I mean, if you got a radar blip and there's no transponder code and it's closing in on a 747,
you got to deal with it right now.
You have to deal with it.
Right?
You don't get the luxury of disbelief.
Right.
You do not.
Which we know happens. That happens all the time.
Yeah, I can tell you this with impunity. Yeah, a lot of positions in government have protocols, as they do, like with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Okay.
Yeah.
And we don't know where these protocols come from, but they're absolute. We have to obey them when you're in the government, and you just deal with it as it's occurring, and you get more help is coming for you to deal with this situation. But at first, you're frontline. You're right there dealing with it. Air traffic controllers. You make a good point here. You really, really do, because these are critical positions.
Yes.
Are exactly, and they have to. Americans who are in the planes flying, or even military who are in the planes flying, have to know that this is occurring. Okay, it has to be out there. They have to know, and that is such a good point. I mean, how can we not know the truth about that? How can we not? And yet they're not going.
No, they absolutely know.
Look, there's why I think the last time on your show I talked about that case of the woman that called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police there outside Metro Halifax there in Lower Sackville.
Yeah.
And she says, could you send a Mountie? There's a UFO over my house. Well, the Mountie goes to the house, knocks on the door. Says, actually, if you want to come look, there's 3 UFOs over your house. Stays there for 2 hours, but there writes it up the report, and does logical things along the way to investigate it. Eventually says, I have to leave for other duties. I think you're safe. If you feel it all bad, call us. We'll come back. I mean, that's taking it seriously. An air traffic controller, lives may depend on it. Seconds might matter, right? I mean, in fact, in Shag Harbour the night before, there was a near collision with a Pan Am flight there out of JFK that was going over. That's written up. That's the last chapter of the book. I have the statement that the co-pilot signed, when the first officer here with me, and, they don't get the luxury of disbelief. People don't realize that, the government, the officials, the suits, right? The politicians, they can sit back and play a game with this. They can sit there and say, well, and like you say, Preston, they can't go even so far as to say there were UFOs, let alone what they might be. They can't go that far. But, they throw some poor bugger out in the field and he's not trained on this. And suddenly he's face to face with the unknown and got to deal with it and wing it. That's why in the, my book there, Sweep Clear 5, I've heard so much feedback when I meet the men that read this book that, I had in the case, the dedication to them. And I say it, and look, I've seen these guys come back and thank me so heartfelt for this. In the book, there's a little dedication. It's one brief paragraph. Are you okay if I read it? Just one short sentence.
Absolutely.
Since this book is dedicated to the men who served in both the U.S. and Canadian Armed Forces during that tense and difficult period of our shared military history known as the Cold War, I recognize and respect those who have shared their stories, and I equally respect those who chose to meticulously honor their oaths of secrecy to the very end. It's far too easy to criticize and cast judgment without considering the perspective of those who are expected to follow orders and confront the unknown if need be, while never being permitted to publicly acknowledge its very existence.
Right.
Yeah, which is such an
This is what we expect. We put some young guy in a uniform out there. and say you go over the side of the ship, you approach that object, whatever, you come back with an answer, you write it up, But
Right.
then again, once it's deemed, a secret case, right? You're not even allowed to admit it ever happened. You
Right.
can't ask anyone about it. You can't seek
Right.
counsel or treatment,
Right.
nothing. You're on your own. These
Right.
are victims.
Yeah. And if you don't do it, you will be ousted or worse.
Sure.
That's the hard part. That's the
You're,
reason you don't talk, because they
you're
know
toast.
what happened. Yeah.
You're toast. Yeah. And it's the most unfair thing. And I was so lucky. I mean, the first case I ever looked into was Shag Harbour because of the unusual way I came to it, and that anyway, that's one thing. But the difference between Shag Harbour and the Shelburne case is so different. You think, okay, Nova Scotia, water, ships, plane, they couldn't be any more different. 1967, 1960, the time couldn't be any more different, right? And the thing is, Shag Harbour, things were always unrestricted. It just, they canceled the search, everybody went away, but it was never secret. They couldn't hide it anyway. It would be like the FBI trying to stop rock and roll. It was too late. You can't shut down all the stations. You can't. Too many people seen it happen. Too many people responded. It was different. But Shelburne happened underwater, out of sight of any civilian. They had complete control of it. And in 1960, on a NATO mission, this is the end of the Eisenhower administration. This is before John Kennedy,
Right.
It was a different world. You didn't question orders, right?
Right.
And when these guys went down there and were confronted and to go back down and to film this, come face to face. And, I mean, when the men first told me the story back in 94, they would use an expression like, oh God, once they finally believed what we were seeing and sent us down with the camera, he says, all hell broke loose. We were all given a firearm. All hell broke loose is one thing. But, when I find the ship's log and I go to that moment they describe when the forces start going up the dog-legged mining course as a training mission, and suddenly they know there's something down there, they go down to have a look. It doesn't say all hell broke loose. Of course, you don't get that kind of language in a ship's deck log, right? But what do I find? I go, okay, there's that moment. All ships are there. They drop. They meant. And what does I say? Assume DEFCON 1? Hey, I look up on Wikipedia and what I find, and I looked up more scholarly sources than that. Supposedly, it's never happened. Not even by a commander in the field, it said. But you know what? I've got not an internet rumor, the actual ship's logbook in front of me, right? And you know what? It says, and the captain signed it. And then I find out when I think about 1960, Cape Scott, I go, Jesus, my dad was on the ship. He was the medic.
Right.
What are the chances? He took.
Well, how do we get the photographs and all the? Can we get an information request on the stuff that
How do we get the
pictures of that? Right? They had to.
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't. I don't think you're ever going to get them. First of all, I mean, I know who took the pictures, who shot the film. I know where they took it. Right in my home city here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, to the Defense Research Establishment. Back then it was called DRE. It's been through several rebrandings on Grove Street in Dartmouth. These guys, I'll tell you the level of detail when they told the story. They drove it up in an old Army Deuce and a half a truck they hated. They used to call it Old Sid because it always broke down. And they drove it to Halifax and delivered the film personally. The two men that had shot it, the divers, right? And handed it over, and I know who they handed it to, which was Dr. Mace Coffey and Jason Greenblatt at there. But I mean, you think you're going to get that? That's very much like Raiders of the Lost Ark. No one's admitted. I heard the story in '94 only because of my work on Shag Harbour, but nobody would tell me the names of the ships or things. But unlike Shag Harbour, it was different. These guys would start to tell you the story. It would come up like when you're talking about that, one of them would lean in and go, when you're talking to a group of divers or officers, they go, you know about Shelburne, don't you? And the others go, no, stop. And they'd say, no, ignore him. We can't talk about that. And they're being very open about Shag Harbour, right? So it took me 29 years to piece it all together. And, when the final piece went in place and I did it, and of course, I didn't expect that, it was that far back. I'd gone so far, me and Graham, to request the logs for every ship in the Canadian Navy going back to the years. And you know what? We stopped a year or two early. We didn't think it could have been that early on due to other clues. And yeah, but eventually what happened is there was an update on the Wikipedia article about the service history of HMCS Cape Scott. Well, I explained it in the book. I had a dream, and I went back to check. I discounted the dream, like what it was telling me, but I just thought, yeah, what kind of ship was it Dad was on? That was a weird ship. It was supposed to be a NATO floating headquarters or something the Canadian Navy had repurposed. And I went and I looked it up and I'm reading, and right at the end, there was one sentence that changed everything. I had all this stuff, but it wasn't quite fitting together. And said in 1960, HMCS Cape Scott served as on a mission off Shelburne, Nova Scotia called Sweep Clear 5. Well, after going through all those ship's logs of the whole Navy for all those other years, you know what? I was never able to put a ship in Shelburne Harbour. So suddenly it describes that. And then when I find the name of the mission, I had to go to a store that deals in military memorabilia here. And I found a copy of an old magazine called The Crow's Nest, which was an official Canadian Navy magazine for sailors. And I looked in it and I looked it up, and it just talked about the mission and named all ships, 10 U.S. warships, 8 Canadian that were involved in a mine training mission off Shelburne, And so I had the names of the ships, so I started requesting ships logs, and one thing led to another. But when I first got the command ship, and I thought, oh my God, that was Dad's boat, and he was on them. I was 5 when it happened, that one, 5, But when I read it, I thought, he took it to the grave, because I used to ask him about Shelburne, because we talked about Shag Harbour, and I know we knew a lot of the Canadian divers. I mean, you think about it, you're a medic, you're on a ship like that, divers are always being checked out, or
right, exactly.
Maybe he's the one who sent you that dream. Wow.
Well,
how deep was the dive? How deep was the dive for this?
It was only 42 feet, 7 fathoms.
Wow.
So it's 7 fathoms in the book where they dropped anchor, right? Yeah, so
Practically
shallow
free.
water. Yeah. So, which brings us back to because of course, one of the things people have said to me, let's just deal with one of the questions. People hear this story, and when they, we don't have time here tonight. When I get into it, it's a pretty wild story compared to Shag Harbour. And, there's no documentation on this yet available, although, there's a film, there's this, there's that. But the ship's logs, ship's logs are a very hard thing to fake in a Navy, because they interact with other ships. You'd have to change them all and coordinate it. It ain't easy. A lot of people don't think about that. It isn't nothing's impossible, but it would be a very difficult thing to fake. But here's one of the things that people suggest when they start realizing, okay, when you hear the stories, because I heard this not just from divers, but Canadian admirals that served in the Navy, the head of Maritime Command, their scientific advice, they were all telling me these stories, right? And they'd say, yeah, well, I wish I could tell you more. But they wanted to tell it, but at the same time, they knew it was hot, So anyway, I pieced it together, and it's just mind-boggling, like, what do you do with it? Where do you go from here? Like, that stuff was taken there. But I mean, one of the things people would suggest, for example, well, maybe it was a Russian sub that had come across. Back then, there was only a 12-mile limit. In 42 feet of water, you could have leaned over the side and knocked on the conning tower.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
The other thing is, in none of the ship's logs does it mention, the presence of a Russian sub. And I have a copy of this book, and I even copied the inside flap. And when you look at the rules, to not mention an enemy ship in your territory. And think about this. A NATO mission, you got these 10 American warships and 8 Canadian in a Canadian harbor, and you had a Russian sub there, it would have had a pretty bad day.
Not only
Nobody
that,
knows.
it would have gone national. Everybody would have known about it. It would have caused an international incident.
It would have. Remember that happened in
Yep.
Sweden a few years later. That happened once, and the Swedes were bombing the hell out of this Russian sub, and it was
Mhm.
just down there taking it.
Yeah,
'cause they
go by
knew-
it. Yeah.
Yeah. It would have
What-
been an incident.
What's amazing to me, Chris, is that if not for the research you've done, nobody would know about this incident.
No, this one would be forgotten. Well, I mean, Shag Harbour, the people were dying off. Well, like I say, somebody like Stanton had never heard of. You know what I
That's
mean?
interesting to me.
So these are
That's
two-
interesting to me. Yeah.
It
That
was
he had
close. It was slipping into the dustbin of history. But Shelburne, nobody ever knew. It was out of the public. You're 10 miles, from downtown Shelburne out at the outer entrance of the harbor that looks more like a river, the configuration. Very few people living out there. It all happened underwater, right?
Yep.
The public never knew. And that's at a time in the Cold War when, nobody questioned security or orders. There were no leaks, And it was only because of my work in Shag Harbour dealing with these people that were in the hands-on position that it started to leak out. But they would start to leak, and then you'd see them. They'd get scared. They'd get like these guys. I could talk about Shag Harbour. They talk about other UFO cases, very strange things. A diver's work is very intense. They often have to haul a friend that died out of a crashed subtracker or a helicopter. They do some awful work. And but to see these guys, and when you start to push their button saying, well, what do you mean? Just tell me the name of the ship you're on, and you'd see they start realizing they'd said too much. And these guys were saying, I'm sorry, I can't say anymore. And you'd push their buttons a bit, and they'd start to tear up. I mean, these guys don't do that. You know what I mean? You could feel it.
Friends, right?
Yeah, and to get that emotional is a big deal. That's right.
And it didn't matter if it was the divers, the scientific consultant, the head of maritime command, the Canadian admirals I spoke to, the captains of these ships. I didn't get them all, but I've been very lucky. There's one of the things that and a lot of people, I try to stress, get out of the armchair. If you can meet the actual people, if you can. If you can't get there, a personal phone call, listen to the voice. You get those things you don't get between the lines in an email. If you have to, sure, use an email. I use email. I Google things up. But when that fails, I don't stop there, But the more up close and personal you can get, you need to let these things seep into your bones. You need to feel them. You need to be an investigator. Like I think about like the old newspapermen when you had the press card in your hat and you watch the old movies, Or, a good example of what somebody did, Coral Lorenzen. When you look at what she did, she was a newspaper woman. And, interestingly, I think the thing for her, she always talked about her childhood sighting before the so-called modern UFO era 47 in the 30s when she was, 9?
Right.
And how dedicated and serious she was. And, there's another thing in the early 60s, you had this huge split between the two biggest UFO groups in the U.S. You had, NICAP, the largest group, right? That was very big on disclosure. And then you had APRO, which is, get the hell out of the armchair and get out there and get your answer to the government. Ain't going to give them to you. And if they give them to you, they're probably not true. This was Lorenzen's attitude. So, there was those two trains of thought. It's not that much different nowadays. You know what I mean? But I think we all have to learn to get along in the field a bit better. You have to, there's a place for us all in there. There's so much to be done. I just don't think we can rely on the government disclosure. Look, I wish them all the best. When I meet them and people say, well, you're not part of that movement. And I said, well, I have questions about it and doubts. I said, listen, I'd love nothing better than if they rub my nose in it. As long as they're getting the real answers, and are willing to actually disclose them to others, like I'm fine with that, it shouldn't be about us so much. It shouldn't be about ego, and it shouldn't be about, personality. Totally. Yeah. I mean, these fields tend to become a cult of personality, and we all lose because of it.
It's still tremendously disappointing to me that people like you and I and are the ones who are on the front lines of UFO research when really it should be well funded.
Sure.
It should have
well, I mean, I can tell you I have no
bookkeeper, who am I? Nobody.
I mean, and you don't say this on the phone, but here's the reality. I'm going, yeah, no, we'll arrange to meet sometime. Once I got that power bill covered, that is, and I'm looking at the calendar of when the money's coming in. Maybe there'll be an Amazon payment this month for,
Yeah.
like, and that's
Yeah.
what you got to do. You know what I mean? But I look at what I've accomplished. Look, I always tell people persistence pays off. Learn
Yes, it
from your
does.
mistakes. I've
Yes.
certainly made mistakes, but I think I've learned from them. And you got to be willing to try new things too.
Right.
You know what I mean? And there's a lot to be learned, but you realize that when you see what goes on in government and with these agencies and in the intelligence community and the police forces and the people in the hands-on from divers to RCMP to FBI agents to whoever in your country, to the pilots, you realize, you they're all on their own.
Yep.
They're all on their own. There's no one coordinating all this, and a lot of stuff's lost. And you get out there, and if you get a good idea, try it. If it's a bad idea in the end, learn from that mistake and don't repeat it. But look for others. And I think that's what I've done. You got to keep an open mind. You hear the expression a lot, but most people really don't have an open mind. They think they do. They claim they do. They don't. You know.
Mhm.
I mean, I hear stories sometimes that, they don't make a lot of sense to me. They might be right, they might be wrong, but you listen, you weigh it, and you may learn down the road. Like, look, when I first heard the Shelburne story, I hated it. I really hated it because you know what? Back in the early 90s when I first got into this, I thought, man, I'm so lucky to have a case like Shag Harbour and it's all open up and getting all these secure documents that are guaranteed with cover letters from the government. And it was always unrestricted. Why isn't somebody? It was great. I was like a kid in a candy shop. But you know what? When I started hearing the really weird stuff that wasn't fitting, and at that time people were still trying to connect it to Shag Harbour and wouldn't talk to Dave,
Mhm.
I was like, oh, they're going to mess up my perfect UFO crash scenario that's airtight and rock solid. And, I'm going to avoid all this mess that the poor people at Roswell had to put up with and the researchers there. I was
Right.
going to avoid all that. And every time I'd hear the Shelburne story, I just hated it. But you know what? You learn to get past that and you learn to embrace the uncertainty and you learn to open your mind. You open your mind, you don't let your brain fall on the ground, but you do open your mind.
You have to follow the
And
story where it goes.
Yeah.
that's
Well,
right.
you tell the truth. That's the point. You're telling the
Sure.
truth. All right. And the more you stick to your guns and you stay with it and you let the other stuff weed itself away from you, and there are plenty of people weeding through that. Trust me, the truth is still the truth. At the end of the day, the truth is still the truth. And you can't form any other opinions other than what real data shows. You can't
Mhm.
form any opinions about anything because data gives you knowledge. And there's a huge difference between certain things that are brought out or used against to show crazy stuff going on. And it never, ever, ever sits there long enough to become knowledge. It's still gossip, it's still misinformation, disinformation, and people can still go back to the original. And you're holding on to something incredible to me. And you're right about something. This is better than Roswell. You are carrying the truth, heavily carrying it from your research.
Actually,
You
very
know,
well known.
nobody, yeah,
I,
The
I,
Silver
I,
case is
yeah,
almost as well known as Roswell.
yeah.
yeah,
I'm not saying it's better than Roswell. I
I
say
do.
it's different than Roswell. Um, I, I can when I used to first go to the U.S. and go to the conferences, I'd be surprised. Some guy would come down, put a microphone in front of you, whether it was local media or Fox News or whatever it was,
Yeah,
and they keep asking you something, and I'd sort of be dancing around it, and I'd say, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get me to say that, my UFO crash is better than your weather balloon, but I'm not going to say it. Oh, did I say it? But I mean, that was what the media was trying to boil it down to, a slogan, a soundbite, right?
yeah,
You know, and unfortunately, we do have to use sound bites. You know what I mean? It works that way,
yes,
right? Because if somebody calls up and
yeah,
even if they're going to do a good short interview, and they say, Chris, we actually only got about 3 minutes at this point in the national news, right? Okay, so they're going to ask me what's the significance of the Shag Harbour incident. You're going to have to give them a sound bite, right? And I had one, right? and that's what you give. But it's unfortunate, but that's the nature. But luckily, due to podcasts and the fact that media's opened up the way it has, you can get out all the gory details now. You can press the flesh. You could make people realize how challenging it is and what we're doing and how worth doing it is, though. You know, because it is worth it.
I want to pop up a few questions. We don't really have a whole lot of time. So, but here's one from Dead Fish Tree Spread.
Wow. Okay. Quite the handle.
Have you heard about anything that was recovered from Lake Huron, the Yukon, or the Alaska shootdowns?
No, I've heard that, you know, that they shot the things down in Alaska and they shot one down over Canada. I haven't heard any details. The officialdom claims it was probably a Chinese spy balloon, and that's certainly possible. In terms of the Yukon, I've heard of a very interesting case there. I couldn't tell you the date. I'm going to have to dig that one out. Do you ever post documents, or should I be sending you stuff before we do appearances? I get all kinds of weird reports. But, you know, somewhere, if I go looking, I couldn't put my finger on it now. I have a report from the Yukon, from the RCMP, about a prospector or somebody, or a fisherman. He was up there and he was out in the summer in some weeds somewhere, like near some swampy ground, and he heard a very strange sound. And suddenly something was chopping this stuff down. He couldn't see an object, and it sounded violent and life-threatening, and he hit the dirt. And when it was all over, it had stirred up, destroyed a lot of vegetation. It actually ground down into the water bottom of this, and he reported to the RCMP, and they came and found the evidence of this and tried to recover something. But I don't know, but I have that RCMP here. I'll have to dig that out. I get so much of that old stuff here, and I'm just so busy with the things that I do, and life keeps getting in the way. As we're, you know, Preston and I were, I suppose, whining about working with little to no budget. In my case, no budget. You know, I've been lucky enough once or twice to have brief support from a TV show to, you know, do a dive or, you know, go to Ottawa for 2 weeks. That was back in the 90s, and there's been, you know, little since, but I do what I can when I can. But yeah, there's that interesting case in the Yukon. If I get that up, I'll send it in, or maybe we can talk about it the next time. But yeah, Lake Huron, no. I mean,
there's lots of activity over the Great Lakes. I know that.
Oh God, yeah. You know, I mean, and that goes back. There's those great cases like the Kinross case. You know, the jet's never been found. They thought they had a couple times, but never has. I mean, and certainly something strange happened with that, with the Moncla case there, and yeah. I mean, it's lots of sightings over the Great Lakes, of course. You know. And that's like, you know, you're coming up in October. You should mention that when you're up for the conference, you know, those dates, that's the anniversary of the Shag Harbour incident, October the 4th, right?
Right.
So we're right down there where it's going to happen, and we're going to be there. So you're in the right spot, you know, at the right time. The only thing we can't do is take you back in time, you know. And that's one of the unique things about the conference we have down there is that you know, we take you there, you know, you meet the actual witnesses that are still alive. There are several. You know, you meet the so-called experts, right? We take you right to the sites. The only thing we can't do is take you back in time, but you know, you'll be able to picture it, and you'll get close. And I think it's kind of a unique conference that way. You know, yeah, the little so-called museum, more of an interpretive center. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's, you know, different than most you've gone. Well, I know it is because I've been to some of the, you know, like I say, I don't travel much anymore. I mean, the last time I was at a conference was a few years ago in Toronto, you know, but I mean, I can remember when I've been down in New Jersey or wherever when I used to get down to the U.S. a lot. Yeah, this is a little different than that, you know, but we're going to have a great time. I'm so looking forward to meeting the two of you. You know,
absolutely.
Talk, because you can sit there at the table at breakfast and talk about the dirt behind the dirt, as I like to call it. You know?
There you go. Yeah.
The stuff we dare not, you know, here, you know, but you know, it should be just great. You know?
Well, I encourage everyone to check out your books because they're amazing, of course. And this is the Shelburne case that definitely deserves to be well known. And of course, Shag Harbour, amazing. So yeah, I'm very excited. We should have a good time.
I'm finally hoping to produce another book about a close encounter case down there. And I've been promising myself I'm going to get to it for a year or two with somebody down there who's a repeater, who I find a very, very credible case. And I think it'll surprise people to find me apply my kind of talents and approach to a case like that. But it's coming. It's just one more thing like me. I've always been one. I'm looking there. I got to get out of my comfort zone, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is hard to do when I'm comfortable anywhere with anything, you know? Yeah. And yeah.
Want to give a shout out to Martin Willis.
Willis. I think of Martin as the voice of reason in the field. And I have to say, look, he's been our MC we've had in the last few years. He's a consummate professional. He's sort of the voice of reason. He's been an extreme supporter of the Shag Harbour case. And we love to have him. You know, when I talked about how we have a tradition of how, you know, when somebody can't, he literally called me one day, the day before going in for a bypass operation, had to cancel. And I promised them we'd have him back the next year. And we did. And he's been coming up ever since as the MC, you know, so that's the kind of thing, you know, but that's the thing about this conference. You know, we've all kind of really made friends in it, and I've seen enemies become friends at this thing, and you know, people that are on other sides of the fence come close that won't miss it to come back, and you know, you got to love that part of it. You know, when you see that happen, because I've been at the ones down south sometimes where you know a fist fight broke out or whatever. You know, it happens. We've yet to have any of that foolishness, so. You know,
I was at a conference once.
But yeah, no, Martin's great supporter of the case and me and my work, and you know, but yeah, he just does a great job for us of keeping things moving along. We have some good tech people there. We have you know, it's a long way from the fishing village and the church hall we used to do. You know, Martin's a big part of it.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Is there somebody else we didn't get to there? That must be it.
We've got everybody just
Maybe the two of you, Mark D'Antonio, Darcy. Is that it? I think it is. Yeah, well, you know, and of course, I think the other star, if anyone was to come or find they can want to go to a different conference, is the area itself. You know, it's kind of unique looking out there into the Gulf of Maine, and you know, you can sit there. It's not that hard to imagine that strange things happen here. You know, it just has that feel to it. And, you know, most of these great sightings here, a lot of people say, how come it's always October? Like when I talked about the case in Metro or Shag Harbour or, hey, Shelburne, October, what is it? Well, it just wouldn't apply to the Shelburne case since it's underwater. And I say, well, there's probably some practical reason. We tend to get a lot more sightings because often, you know, it's a time of year when we have clearer skies and not a lot of cloud cover and a lot of, you know, it's just sometimes that simple, like, you know. But there's a history here of all types of the phenomena, like I say, from close encounters to just the really exotic, weird stuff, you know. And unfortunately, you know, one of the negative aspects when you get a case like Shag Harbour or Shelburne is it kind of eclipses the real heritage of all these other aspects of the phenomena that happen. But, you know, you'll get a taste of it and meet some of the people, the locals. And,
I'm very excited. Yeah.
We'll probably be driving along and say, oh, God, you know what happened here? You know?
I love those running conversations about stuff. Preston did that to me all the way out to Georgia. Oh, I have a case right there. And we'd look at the town a little bit, you know.
Yeah, we drove right through Hopkinsville, Kentucky. I'm like,
oh, yeah, wow, yeah.
Like, there it is.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Well, I hope some people watching can make it because it's going to be a fun show.
Absolutely.
October 3rd to 5th. Thanks, Chris. But we do have to end the show.
Well, thank you for the interest in having me again, and looking forward to meeting up there, getting up close and personal with you both, and it should be a blast.
Absolutely.
So, tell everyone, you know, keep looking up. Take your hands out of your pockets. Too many people walk around with their hands in their pockets.
Camera out.
Look up. You just never know.
That's right.
Yeah. That's right. God bless
thanks, Chris. Thank you, everybody. I want to give a quick shout out to all you folks watching. We truly appreciate it. You guys who've generously donated really helps us a lot. Much love to you, Namaste and Bob Thorson, Raul Melendez, you guys are amazing. JD, thank you.
Yes.
We love all you guys. It's truly
Yep.
because of you we do this show. So thank you so much for your support. Kayla Bradley says, Chris is certainly a pioneer in his search for the truth. Lovely guest. I totally agree. Great guest, great show. Thank you guys. This was awesome. So,
Right.
yeah. All right, Dolly, got to bring us out.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. We're so excited about going to Shag Harbour. And Chris, thank you very, very much. I've learned to hold you in great esteem already, and I can't wait to meet you in person. We are coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We're on Facebook, we're on Roku, we're on Rumble, and we're on YouTube. Everybody go have a wonderful week. September is a great month. It's a great month to be in. Y'all be good. And we'll see you next Monday. Night, night.